Alright, so Walter White ruins basically everyone's life throughout Breaking Bad, but the interesting thing is each character hates something different about him. Like, they all see different facets of Walt's personality, and each person zeroes in on the specific way Walt made their life worse. We're gonna go through every major character and figure out what they hated most about Walter White. Not just disliked, but genuinely despised. The thing about Walt that made them wish they'd never met him. Jesse Pinkman, being treated like property. The thing Jesse hated most about Walt is that Walt never treated him like an actual human being with feelings and autonomy. To Walt, Jesse was always just a tool to be used. And the messed up part is this took Jesse years to fully realize. At first, Jesse thinks Walt's his partner, his mentor, maybe even a father figure. Walt calls him son sometimes, acts protective, teaches him chemistry. Jesse wants so badly to believe Walt cares about him, but slowly, painfully, Jesse starts to see the truth. Every time Walt says he cares about Jesse, it's followed by Walt manipulating Jesse into doing something dangerous or traumatic. Every time Walt protects Jesse, it's really about protecting Walt's interests. The moment this really crystallizes is probably when Jesse figures out that Walt poisoned Brock. That's when Jesse understands that Walt was willing to poison a child, a kid Jesse loved, just to manipulate Jesse's emotions and actions. Walt used Jesse's love for this little boy as a weapon against him. That's treating someone like property. Like Jesse's feelings are just buttons Walt can push to get desired outcomes. Like Jesse doesn't have his own life and his own relationships that matter independently of what Walt needs. Throughout the show, Walt makes decisions about Jesse's life without asking him. Walt lets Jane die to control Jesse. Walt manipulates Jesse into killing Gale. Walt gaslights Jesse constantly about who's responsible for what. And through all of it, Walt acts like he's doing Jesse a favor, like Jesse should be grateful. What Jesse hates is that Walt never saw him as a whole person. Jesse was always just Jesse the addict, Jesse the screw-up, Jesse the useful idiot who could be shaped into whatever Walt needed. Walt never respected Jesse's intelligence or his conscience or his capacity for growth. By the end, Jesse's just completely broken by years of being Walt's puppet. And what he hates most is that he let it happen, that he believed Walt's lies for so long, that he gave Walt the power to treat him like an object instead of a person. Skylar White, being trapped inside the lies. What Skylar hated most about Walt is that he trapped her inside his criminal life while constantly insisting he was doing it all for the family. Skylar didn't choose any of this. She didn't want her husband to be a meth cook. She didn't want to live off drug money. She didn't want to be complicit in crimes. But Walt made those choices for both of them and then acted like she should be grateful. The thing that makes this especially painful for Skylar is Walt's justification. Every time Skylar tries to leave or tries to stop him, Walt plays the family card. I'm providing for you and the kids. I'm making sure you're taken care of. Everything I do is for this family. And that justification is what traps Skylar, because if she turns Walt in, she destroys the family. The kids lose their father, they lose their home, everyone finds out their dad is a criminal. If she tries to divorce him, Walt's already hidden all the money in ways that make her look complicit. Skylar's stuck in this position where Walt's crimes have surrounded her, and any move she makes to escape just makes things worse. She's imprisoned by Walt's choices, but Walt keeps acting like he's the hero protecting everyone. What Skylar hates is the hypocrisy. Walt claims everything is for the family while actively destroying the family. He traumatizes his kids, he puts everyone in danger, he makes Skylar an accomplice to murder. And through it all, he maintains this delusion that he's the good dad making sacrifices. There's that scene where Skylar is in the storage unit looking at the massive pile of money and she asks Walt, "How much is enough? How big does this pile have to be?" And Walt doesn't have an answer because it was never actually about the family. It was always about Walt's ego. But Walt won't admit that. He keeps lying to Skylar and expecting her to play along. He keeps insisting his motives are pure while his actions destroy everything Skylar cares about. What Skylar hates most is being forced to be complicit in Walt's self-deception. She has to watch him lie to himself while those lies trap her in a nightmare she never chose. Hank Schrader, the humiliation. What Hank hated most about Walt was the humiliation of hunting Heisenberg for over a year while Heisenberg was sitting at his dinner table the whole time. Hank's entire identity is wrapped up in being a good DEA agent. He's proud of his work, proud of his record, proud of his reputation. Catching Heisenberg becomes this obsession for him because Heisenberg is the biggest case in his territory. And the whole time, it's Walt, his brother-in-law, the mild-mannered high school teacher who seems scared of his own shadow. Walt's been in Hank's house dozens of times, eating Hank's food, listening to Hank talk about the investigation, probably laughing internally at how clueless Hank is. When Hank finally figures it out, Reading that inscription in the book from Gale, the look on his face says everything. It's not just shock, it's humiliation. How did he miss this? How was Walt right under his nose the entire time? Hank's been telling stories about tracking Heisenberg, showing off his detective work, acting like he's closing in on this criminal genius. And Walt's been sitting there the whole time, probably feeling superior, knowing that Hank will never catch him because Hank's looking everywhere except at the guy drinking his beer. That humiliation is what drives Hank's obsession after he figures it out. It's not just about justice anymore, it's personal. Hank needs to be the one who brings Walt down because Walt made him look like a fool. What makes it worse is Hank can't even tell anyone at first. He can't go to his DEA colleagues and admit that Heisenberg has been his brother-in-law the whole time. Can you imagine how that would look? Every case Hank's ever worked would be questioned, his judgment would be suspect, his career would be over. So Hank has to work the case secretly with just Gomez helping him, building evidence while keeping up appearances with Walt. And every interaction with Walt after that discovery is torture because Hank knows, and Walt knows that Hank knows, but they're both pretending everything's normal. What Hank hates most is that Walt made him feel stupid. Walt, who Hank probably thought was kind of pathetic and harmless, outsmarted him for over a year, and Hank can never fully recover from that blow to his ego and his professional pride. Saul Goodman, being an amateur who ignores advice. What Saul hated most about Walt is that Walt was an amateur playing in the professional crime world while ignoring every piece of good advice Saul gave him. Saul's a criminal lawyer who's been navigating the underworld for years. He knows how things work, he knows what mistakes to avoid, he knows when to cut losses and run. That experience is valuable and Saul tries to share it with Walt constantly. But Walt never listens. Walt thinks he's smarter than everyone, including Saul. So when Saul gives him advice based on years of experience, Walt dismisses it and does whatever he wants instead. And then Walt's bad decisions create disasters that Saul has to help clean up. Someone needs to disappear? Call Saul. Body needs disposing? Saul knows a guy. Legal problems? Saul figures it out. Walt creates messes and expects Saul to magically solve them. What frustrates Saul is that most of these problems were avoidable. If Walt had just listened to basic street smart advice, half the crises in Breaking Bad never happened. But Walt's ego won't let him take advice from Saul because Walt sees Saul as beneath him intellectually. There's this dynamic where Walt treats Saul like a useful idiot. Walt uses Saul's connections and skills, but doesn't respect Saul as a person or as someone with valuable expertise. Walt talks down to Saul, dismisses his concerns, and basically treats him like hired help rather than a consultant who might actually know more about the criminal world than Walt does. Saul can see the disasters coming from a mile away because he's seen it all before. He knows what happens when people get too greedy or too proud or too visible, but Walt doesn't want to hear it. And the worst part for Saul is he's stuck. Once you're Walt's lawyer, you know too much. You can't just walk away because you're implicated in everything. So Saul's trapped, working for this amateur who keeps ignoring his advice and creating increasingly dangerous situations. What Saul hates most is that Walt's arrogance puts everyone in danger unnecessarily. Saul's trying to help Walt succeed and survive, and Walt acts like Saul doesn't know anything. Meanwhile, Walt's decisions keep escalating the risk for everyone involved. Gus Fring, emotional volatility. What Gus hated most about Walt is that Walt was emotionally volatile and let pride override business sense, making him completely unpredictable. Gus operates on pure discipline and control. His emotions are locked down tight. His decisions are strategic and long-term focused. His business is run like a professional corporation with systems and procedures. Walt is the opposite. Walt's emotional, impulsive, and driven by ego. Walt makes business decisions based on how he feels in the moment or whether someone showed him proper respect. From Gus's perspective, this makes Walt impossible to work with reliably. Gus can't predict what Walt will do because Walt doesn't operate on rational self-interest. Walt operates on pride and emotion, like when Walt runs over those two dealers to save Jesse. That's an emotional, impulsive decision that causes massive problems for Gus's operation. A rational actor would have let Jesse handle his own mistakes, but Walt can't do that because of his attachment to Jesse, or when Walt refuses to just cook meth and stay in his lane. Walt constantly tries to insert himself into business decisions that aren't his concern. He questions Gus's methods, he makes demands, he acts like he's a partner when he's really just an employee. What Gus hates is that Walt's pride makes him unpredictable and uncontrollable. Gus can't just pay Walt and get reliable work product. He has to constantly manage Walt's ego and emotions while wondering when Walt's going to do something stupid that endangers the entire operation. Gus values professionalism and predictability. Mike is the perfect example of what Gus wants, someone who does the job efficiently without drama or complications. Walt is the opposite of that. And the thing that probably frustrates Gus most is that Walt is brilliant at chemistry, but refuses to just be the chemist. If Walt would just cook the meth and collect his money and shut up, he'd be incredibly valuable. But Walt can't do that because his ego needs more. What Gus hates is that Walt's emotional volatility makes him a liability. You can't trust someone who might do something completely irrational because their feelings got hurt. And that unpredictability is what eventually gets Gus killed, because Gus can't anticipate the insane move of using Hector as a suicide bomber. Mike Ehrmantraut, escalating everything. What Mike hated most about Walt is that Walt couldn't stop escalating situations. Walt didn't know how to leave well enough alone or when to just take the win. Mike's been in the game long enough to know that the key to survival is knowing when to be aggressive and when to back off. You handle problems with the minimum force necessary. You don't attract unnecessary attention. You don't turn small issues into big wars. Walt does the opposite. Every situation Walt touches becomes bigger and more complicated than it needs to be. Small problems become medium problems become catastrophes, and it's always because Walt can't control himself. That scene where Mike finally tells Walt off, where he says everything was working fine until Walt came along with his pride and his ego, that's Mike expressing years of frustration. They had a good thing going with Gus. Professional operation, good money, minimal risk, and Walt destroyed it all. And even after Gus is dead, Walt keeps escalating in. They've got distribution working with Lydia. They're making incredible money. They could coast on this setup for years. But Walt has to keep pushing for more territory, more production, more everything. Mike tries to be the voice of reason. He tries to tell Walt when they've made enough money, when they should walk away, when they're taking unnecessary risks. But Walt never listens because Walt always thinks he's the smartest guy in the room. What Mike hates is that Walt's ambition has no ceiling. There's never enough money, never enough power, never enough respect. Walt will keep escalating until everything collapses, and he'll take everyone down with him. Mike's also frustrated because he's cleaning up Walt's messes constantly. Walt creates problems through his ego and impulsiveness, and Mike has to figure out how to fix them. It's exhausting and it's unnecessary. That's why Mike's so relieved when he thinks he's finally getting out. He's done with Walt's chaos. He's done with escalating situations that should be simple. He just wants to grab his money and disappear. And then Walt kills him, and even that is unnecessary. Mike's leaving, he's not a threat, the situation is de-escalating naturally, but Walt can't let it go. Mike hurt Walt's feelings by telling him the truth, so Walt has to escalate one more time by shooting Mike. What Mike hated most about Walt is that Walt turned everything he touched into a bigger disaster than it needed to be. Walt didn't know when to stop, when to back down, when to just take the money and be satisfied, and that relentless escalation destroyed everything and everyone around him. The common thread. Looking at what everyone hated about Walt, there's a pattern. Jesse hates being treated as property. Skylar hates being trapped by lies. Hank hates the humiliation. Marie hates her husband being treated as collateral. Saul hates Walt ignoring good advice. Gus hates the emotional volatility. Mike hates the constant escalation. But underneath all of these specific grievances is the same core problem. Walt's ego, his inability to see other people as mattering independently of what Walt needs, his need to be recognized and respected and powerful. Every person in Walt's orbit suffers because Walt can't just be satisfied with enough. He can't just be a good partner to Jesse, an honest husband to Skylar, a humble brother-in-law to Hank. He has to dominate, control, manipulate, escalate. And what's tragic is Walt probably doesn't even understand what each person hates about him. He thinks Jesse's just emotional, Skylar's ungrateful, Hank's a threat, Saul's a coward, Mike's negative. Walt can't see that he's the problem because his ego won't let him. That's the ultimate thing everyone hates about Walt. He destroys their lives and then doesn't even have the self-awareness to understand what he's done or why they're suffering. He's so wrapped up in his own narrative of being the wrong genius who's just trying to provide for his family that he can't see the wreckage he's creating. Everyone around Walt hates something different about him, but they all hate the same root cause. Walter White's ego destroyed them all in different ways, and he never even noticed because he was too busy feeling sorry for himself. Let me know in the comments if you think I missed anything or if you've got different takes on it, what specific characters hated about Walt. Breaking Bad's so rich with character dynamics that there's always more layers to explore.